Welcome to the Legally Ever After Real Estate Podcast, where we help you build, protect, and pass on your assets. I'm your host, estate planning attorney, Pamela Mass Garrett. Let's get started. Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for being on today.
My pleasure, Pam. It's great to be with you. Thanks for the invite.
So you are a property management pro. What tips do you have for real estate investors, whether they're kind of starting out or they've been working with their portfolio for a while? What tips do you have?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple things, and the first part of it starts out at what property are you going to go buy that you're going to be an investor in? And there's some great wisdom that came from a gentleman by the name of Oliver Frascona, a longtime real estate attorney in the Denver area who sadly passed away about a decade ago. But he had a saying, and it was perfect. It was called the 3-2-1 model. That what you want to have in an investment property is a minimum of 3 bedrooms, minimum of 2 bathrooms, and in a minimum of 1 good school district. And it's been interesting. He said that. I remember hearing him talk about that 20 years ago. And it's interesting how true that plays out today. That when you have a minimum of 3 bedrooms, you've got that minimum of 2 bathrooms, you found a home in a good school district, that those homes tend to rent the best. They tend to have the best price appreciation long term. And those are areas that tend to be most desirable. All of that said, that is not the only rule of investing. There are plenty of other good opportunities. There's some really trendy areas up and down the Front Range right now that don't necessarily fit that model. And so, although that is a great model to hold on to, it's not the only model. But it does point back to the importance of this. Getting the right property at the right price is pivotally important. And investors need to make sure that whatever that property is and whatever that price point is, that you've got the right property on your hands. Because ultimately that buy-side decision, you are forever locked into that price that you purchased the property for. Now, interest rates may come and go. Interest rates obviously right now have made a big shift and a big adjustment over the past 5 or 6 months to our interest rates. Today, relative to 6 months ago, don't look all that attractive. Although historically, these are still absolutely astoundingly great interest rates. I think America and the rest of the world are just having to adopt to a new mindset that these interest rates are very different from what they used to be. So you marry the purchase price, but you can date the interest rate. You can always refi, on that piece. So from that particular standpoint, the first piece of advice is make sure that you've got the right property. Then the second piece of advice is how are you going to manage that property? Now, there are a lot of investors that choose to manage the properties themselves. And for those that enjoy doing that is just part of their lifestyle. It's what they do. They don't mind taking the maintenance phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of winter when the heat has gone out. But for a lot of other folks, they don't want to mess with that. They want to enjoy the benefits of being an investor without having to deal with the day-to-day components of that. And so there's really a decision that a lot of investors have to make, which is, am I going to go down this path on my own, or am I going to go down a different path and trust that to somebody else? The key component either way is you have to have the knowledge and the expertise to make sure that you're doing it and doing it correctly. What a lot of investors do is they think, man, this is easy. I put a sign in the front yard and prospective tenants start calling me. And the next thing you know, I've got my place rented. It's all good. I found a lease on the internet and life is good. Well, it's all good until that lease that came from another state that is online gets challenged in an eviction proceeding. And all of a sudden the judge is not as favorable towards that internet lease that has clauses either that aren't there or are there that are contradictory to Colorado real estate law. So that's a really, really important piece of the equation. And then the last piece then is how do you set that up? Do you set that up in a LLC structure? Do you set that up? Not that obviously, Pam, falls into your category of expertise, and that particular piece, I'll totally defer to you on.
Greg, there's a few great things that you said there that I wanted to kind of unpack, and kind of, you started off with, finding that right property. And then once you find that property, it's okay, do I want to self-manage? Do I not want to manage? And in kind of making that decision, what are some of the factors people should be thinking about? It's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. And so one of the things that you mentioned is, do you have the expertise to do it? What are kind of the risks that you may come across? And then just the time commitment. And I imagine that there's a lot of people who come and use your services after they start and things go horribly wrong. And you guys are kind of coming in. So what are the things they should be thinking about realistically to know to make that decision?
Yeah, great question. The first is getting a really good realtor that's going to help you find that right property. And it's getting a realtor that has some expertise in finding investment properties. And we do a lot of partnering with a number of realtors in the realtor community that have that kind of expertise, where they're trying to go help craft the right offer and the right buy-side decision. And then we're then taking on the responsibilities of doing the management, thereafter. And so that's probably the biggest piece that we see, is making sure that you have the right person or the right expertise to go find the right property to begin with. And then what your deal structure then looks like. How's it going to be financed? How much money are you putting down? What is your monthly financial obligations to that property relative to what we can rent it for? So there's a lot of decision nodes that are pretty key in terms of how that plays out. And obviously we want to be as much of assistance as we can on the rental side of that, partnering with a really good realtor on the buy side.
And so can someone kind of bring you in the beginning of the process to kind of figure out what the rental rate would be and what the costs are going to be associated with the property, so that it's part of their decision making? If they know that they want to work with a professional property manager, it's kind of involved in that decision, or when do they bring you in?
Yeah, it's a great question. And bringing us in earlier on in the process is absolutely the way to go. So we get phone calls, text messages, emails from our realtor referral partners up and down the Front Range that will just ping us and say, hey, we're looking at putting an offer in on this particular house. Can you get us some rental comps? And we're glad to do that day in and day out. That way, there is at least a planning mechanism in place which says, hey, if we think we can buy it for X, we're going to put Y down as a percentage, and then what will it rent for? So then they can be looking at what do cash on cash returns look like? What do cap rates end up looking like on a small apartment building? Those kinds of things. So doing more work up front, just like anything else in life, saves a lot of heartache, on the back end. And it's interesting that you mentioned what are some of the challenges that we see landlords run into. My last phone call before you and I jumped on this podcast was with an investor, bought an investment property, decided he wanted to do it himself, and now it's just turned out to be a nightmare. The tenant is not paying their rent. They're trying to figure out what legal recourse do they have, and how does this 10-day notice thing work? And ultimately, the more I chatted with him, he said, Greg, can you just send me your paperwork? I just don't want to bother with this. And so really the decision to either outsource to us as a property management company or not is really a quality of life decision, right? Do you want to tackle those things on your own as an investor, or do you place more of a value on your time and you just say, you know what, I'm just going to pay for Property Management Colorado to take care of that for me, and I want to go enjoy my weekend, not have to figure out what a 10-day posting is supposed to say and how I post it and what's the timeline and those kinds of things.
So it sounds like with that client, once the trouble started, you could still get involved. So you could even help and take over. Obviously, we don't want it to get to that, preventative maintenance. I'm sure working with you, it helps prevent that situation, but you guys can even jump in and help someone even when they're in a bind, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is oftentimes when we get a phone call from an existing investor who's got renters in there. And when a renter-landlord relationship is going well and the tenants are paying on time, they're taking good care of the property, it's very similar to, autopilot in the cockpit of an airplane. When it's all going good, it's all going good. But then when it turns, then you really have problems on your hands. And so we do end up helping out a lot of investors mid-lease, mid-term, when all of a sudden autopilot's not working anymore and there's challenges. Then we end up helping them navigate those challenges. We start managing the property. We take over the lease for them and manage it to completion.
And then if someone works with you from the beginning, I'd imagine that people are better screened. And so do you guys have a process for how you're bringing tenants in to kind of minimize the amount of time that those kinds of issues are going to come up?
Yeah, we do. And we have a really extensive and thorough screening process. Basically, anything that we can do from a screening standpoint to weed out what we would call challenging renters, that's what we're gunning for. So we run nationwide criminal background checks, credit background checks, do income verification, a number of different steps to make sure that we're not just finding a renter, but that we're finding a good quality renter. And those are two very, very different things. And yes, the more diligence that we take up front, the better our chances of not having problems on the back end of that. And it does. It saves our landlords just a lot of heartache, heartburn, the whole 9 yards. So the one component, and actually there's two components we've not been able to screen for. So in what we do in that particular scenario, in the diligence that we put into that process, we can't ever eliminate that risk, but we're trying to mitigate that risk. And there's really two components that we don't have a lens on. So obviously we don't have the crystal ball that says today, this tenant is a really good tenant. Their credit is good, no criminal history or whatever the case may be. We don't have the crystal ball that tells us they're going to get laid off in 6 months. And so that particular piece we don't necessarily have. The other component that we don't necessarily see to be able to completely eliminate the risk is, how do these people live their lives? So then you have good credit, no criminal history, whatever the case may be, but they just don't take very good care of the place, right? Those are the kinds of things that we, again, try to help mitigate the risk. We can't completely eliminate it.
Do you have a recommended kind of duration of lease for a tenant in a new property? Are you guys typically trying to do 1-year leases, 2-year leases?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's really more of a market-driven dynamic. Most renters are looking for a 1-year lease. Too much shorter than that, and they're having to go to too much moving expense to then just pack up and move again. And too much longer than that, they're kind of losing the flexibility that they really do like to have as a renter. And so in our portfolio, about 80% of our leases are 1-year leases. We do have some that are shorter because somebody is here for a 10-month job assignment or something like that, and so we'll do a 10-month lease. We have some longer. A lot of our military personnel that rent from us, when the government PCSs them into, say, our Colorado Springs market, and they're going to be there for 3 years. They don't want to have to move 3 times in 3 years. They'd like to just move once, and so they rent from us for 3 years until Uncle Sam, PCSs them off to someplace else.
And then, we were chatting a little bit about kind of your screening process to, get those quality tenants. Do you kind of recommend continued inspections, or what do you recommend for kind of maintaining that relationship and making sure the property is being well taken care of?
Yeah, great question. So we inspect all of our properties 3 to 4 times a year. And it's for that very reason. We want to make sure that we're identifying if there are unauthorized pets, if there's unauthorized occupants, what kind of condition. Are they taking care of the house? Obviously, if we sign a 1-year lease and we move them in on day 1 and we don't see them again for 365 days, there's a lot that can happen at the property. But if we're seeing them every 90 to 120 days, it's a different ballgame, and it gives us an opportunity to address any patterns that may be disturbing. If they're not watering the lawn appropriately, or they're not, weeding the yard, or whatever the case may be, or if there's 2 dogs on the lease and we knock on the door and they open the door and 4 dogs gregariously greet us at the front door, well, we've got some kind of a lease violation because 2 of those dogs aren't supposed to be there. And same thing if we run into unauthorized occupants. We don't allow marijuana our lease points to federal statutes, which still don't allow for marijuana. So we're the same way. And so smoking marijuana in any of our properties is not allowed. And so it gives us an opportunity to address those kinds of things while we're only at 3 or 4 month segments versus they've rented us from a year, maybe even signed a renewal lease, et cetera. So again, what we're trying to do there, Pam, is we can never eliminate the risk of a renter living in your investment property, but we're trying to do everything we can by screening processes, these site visits, to mitigate those risks as best as we can.
What are so we've talked about some of the mistakes people make, sometimes it's downloading those leases online that don't comply with our laws. And so then when they get into a situation where they need to evict, they have an issue. And then we've talked a little bit about, making sure you have a quality tenant and how thorough you guys kind of vet those and then the inspection process. Is there other common mistakes or issues that you've seen that people can really learn from to do a better job in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we see a lot of is oftentimes we'll hear from an investor that now has a nightmare on their hands and is turning the property over to us. And we say, okay, what can we just get the lease, get the background checks you did this? And they tell us, well, we just kind of went off of our gut feel. We really like these people. And so we just went off of that. And so we rented it. Well, that is definitely a mistake that lots of investors have put themselves in harm's way on that one. The next thing that we see is they establish a personal friendship with the renters. And that's good when it's good. But when all of a sudden the renter is not paying and they're now wanting to play on the owner's heartstrings and, hey, poor me, and can you give me some flexibility? And so this really has to be looked at more of a business relationship. And so keeping an arm's length distance for clients, highly recommend that. And obviously it gives us an opportunity because we do look at it as a business relationship. The client hires us to make sure that we're managing the residents, managing them well, et cetera. And so that's another mistake that we often see. Then the other one that we often see is oftentimes the investor may be out of state. And so they're renting to somebody here in state. And so they're never at the property to even know if it's being taken care of or it's not being taken care of, or are there lease violations? Are there unauthorized pets? Those are some of the biggest mistakes that we typically see, investors make. And then the last one that really points, Pam, on your end is, did they get the right structure in place to properly take care of this asset called a rental property? Did they properly protect that? Insurance-wise, legal-wise, LLC structure-wise, those kinds of components.
Yeah, that's super helpful to hear. If someone is looking for a property management company, what are some things that if kind of they're evaluating different types of property management companies? I know your management company has been around for a long time. You're one of the most well-established. You're one of the largest. You're high quality. What are some questions or things that if they are looking that they should be looking for?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the components that we would highly encourage investors to think through is, number one is, are they full-time property managers? There are a lot of folks that do property management kind of part-time. They have a residential real estate brokerage. They do a little property management on the side. And so that is one thing we would highly encourage folks is find a property manager that this is their focus. This is their focus exclusively. That is the case with us. We are just full-time property managers. And so we don't do anything on the residential, brokerage side, which makes sure that for our clients, they're getting 100%, of our time, effort, and energy to do that. The second component is, do they have a local knowledge and local presence? There's a number of national property management companies that are moving into some of the bigger cities, and they barely have a footprint, only just a handful of employees here, and they're trying to navigate things from multiple states away. And real estate is very local. I would never hire someone from the East Coast or the West Coast to come list my property for sale here in the Denver area. I would want somebody with local market knowledge, and property management really is no different, on that front. And so I think having good local market knowledge, market presence, is a really, really important factor. I think third thing along those lines is understanding the staffing and support model, making sure that there's enough staff, enough support to be able to provide backup documentation, to be able to return telephone calls in a timely fashion. Do they have enough vendors to actually go source work when a toilet is backed up or garbage disposal is not working, a roof is leaking, etc. So making sure that there's enough staff and enough, support structure, to be able to do that. And then there's a lot of other components. So we're members of the National Association of Residential Property Managers, NARPM, and there's a lot of great education opportunities that we get with that. A lot of great information as we're brainstorming with our colleagues, and it's an industry trade group that we're just doing everything that we can to make ourselves better. And so having that kind of accreditation is really solid. And I think the last thing is property management requires a real estate license here in the state of Colorado. And we are stunned at how many people we find they're doing property management and providing property management services, but don't have a real estate license. And so making sure that they are licensed, insured, all that fun stuff is important.
These are some really great points. And I know when clients come to me, asset protection is a huge component of what they're looking for. And one of the things that I like about what your company does is investors get that extra layer of asset protection by working with a property management, because not only are they screening, I know nothing's perfect, nothing you get completely, but you're screening people, you're inspecting people, you're looking at the leases, you're making sure everything's protected. And then you also have insurance as well, I would think, on the different types of work that you're doing, right?
Correct. Yep. Through our vendors, we require, like any property work that we're doing at a property. So we, as a property management company, we carry our own set of insurance. We require all of our vendors that are doing physical work at the property, they're required to have insurance. So we are making sure that we are protecting that asset as best as we can, knowing that our footprint is coming in and coming out all throughout the rental process.
Yeah, I was just chatting the other day with a roofer, and he was talking about how a lot of roofing companies in town don't have the proper insurance coverage. So, and roofing is such a very dangerous business, right? And so they don't have the workers' comp, and then one of the roofers on your roof gets injured and then they sue you. And so the fact that you can extrapolate that to all the different vendors that you have to have as an investor in that type of risk, not only to kind of tenants doing things and certain things, but bringing vendors on the property, the fact that you guys are working with professionals that you've vetted, that have insurance, you have your own insurance, you're verifying that insurance can really protect you from an asset protection component too.
Sure. Very true.
And then can you share a little bit more? I know we've chatted a little bit about your company, and can you tell us a little bit more about your story and kind of the best way people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been around since about 2007. And interestingly enough, prior to that, I was part of an ownership group. We had a real estate company, mortgage company, title company. And in 2006, there were obviously a lot of storm clouds beginning to blow around the whole real estate sector. And obviously, we all know what transpired shortly thereafter. And so in 2007, we sold those and started this residential property management company 15 and a half years ago. And it's been a great avenue for us to be able to provide something that is so pivotally important that we all need. We all need shelter. We all need a roof over our heads. And so there's about 31 or 32 of us at the company. I'm the owner of the company. I have 31 or 32 amazing employees that help us take care of our clients, our residents, day in and day out. As a matter of fact, we have an organizational principle that we all adhere to, that we are an organization who cares, and CARES is an acronym that stands for we care for our clients, we care for our associates, which is our realtor partners and our vendors. We care for our residents, the people that are renting the property from us. E is our employees. We take time to make sure we're caring for each other and making sure that we have each other's back. And then the last thing is just taking care of ourselves, making sure that we are the best version of ourselves that we're bringing into the marketplace, every single day. And taking time to take care of our own mental health and physical health, and doing everything that we can to just do our very best. And so that is a big component of what we focus on. And my entire team, when we make decisions, when we evaluate how we are doing, it all points back to that. And so we have 3 different offices up and down the Front Range. We service from Fort Collins down to Fountain, Fort Carson, which is on the south end of Colorado Springs. Our main office is in Denver, which services the Denver Metroplex. Then we also have an office in Colorado Springs that services El Paso County. And then we also have another office in northern Colorado that services the Fort Collins, Loveland, Longmont, Greeley triangle. So we have staff in all 3 places. It's basically the I-25 corridor, Fort Collins down to Fort Carson. And we do this 24/7, 365. So best way to get in contact with me, two avenues on that front. You can reach me via phone. That number is 303-888-8826. Or my email, which is G as in Greg .Bacheller. And that's B as in boy, ACHELLER at 303rent.com.
I love that. I love the acronym CARES. And I think, all of my interactions with you and your team, I've really I didn't know that was the acronym, but I definitely, it all clicks hearing you say that. So I really feel that. And I know a lot of the realtors that work with you feel that as well, even just from the interaction. So that's really cool. 2 final questions.
It's always good. Obviously, acronyms are cool, but they don't mean a darn thing if you don't live by them, right? And,
yeah.
So I'm delighted to hear that you have sensed that, you feel that from me and my crew. We're very grateful. We do our very best to try to live that out in the marketplace every day. And there's some days when we do better than others. I ask of my team this every day. I have always felt that perfectionism can be just suffocating, but I do ask for a perfect effort. I ask that of myself every day, and I ask that of my team every day. And that's very different from perfectionism. There's a lot of freedom that goes on along with that. And literally when we make a mistake, whatever the case may be, and I'll talk to one of my teammates about that, and I know they've made a perfect effort. We just blew it. Then we'll just go take responsibility and fix it and move on. Yeah,
perfect effort. I like that. It's progress, not perfection, is key, and I like that approach. So 2 final questions. The first question I know is on everyone's mind right now with where the market is. How do you feel, as someone who is in the industry, for investors, is now a time to panic? Is now a time to continue investing? What is your take on what's going on right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. My personal take is this is a great time for investors. So if we waltz the calendar back 6 months, there were so many competitive offers on every single property. It was driving prices up. It was typically a cash offer that was winning, and it was leaving lots of buyers on the sidelines. That's not happening as much, obviously, right now. And so from that particular standpoint, we're actually starting to see prices soften in some areas. That creates really good buying opportunities. So for a lot of investors, I think this is a perfect window. There's always some seasonality in the winter months that prices tend to soften some. Even when they were escalating like crazy, they would still escalate at a lower level. And it'll be interesting to see what these winter months look like. But these are often times when Mr. Market, if you will, is frowning, that it does create some big smiles for investors. And so I'm very, very optimistic that the investor community is going to have some great opportunities. I am still very bullish on the whole Front Range. This is just a great place to live. Of course, I'm a little biased. I can't quite put the native bumper sticker on my car if I wanted to, but I've been here since the late 70s as a kid, and I get why people want to move to the Front Range or to Colorado just in general. It's an absolutely great state. It's a great area. And it's why I live here. My family lives here, and we love that a ton. So I think a couple of components with that. Obviously, with the Fed trying as diligently as they are to get inflation under control, they're having no choice but to make some pretty aggressive adjustments to the Fed funds rate. Obviously, the bond market then reacts and responds to that, and then mortgage interest rates, follow suit to make their, adjustments accordingly. And so obviously interest rates are double or double plus a little bit beyond where they were 6 months ago, but I don't think that's going to be long-lived. A lot of the economists that I read day in and day out think that we'll probably have interest rates that could spike, towards the end of the year, maybe January, February, and then begin to taper off, again. And so if it goes in the 6s and 7s, my wife and I bought our first home, and it was just shy of 10% in the mid-90s, and that's just what interest rates were. So obviously 2 7/8 is better than 9 7/8, and I don't know that we'll ever see 2 7/8 again. That's been a pretty remarkable run. But hopefully interest rates that go back to the 4s and 5s will be pretty spectacular. And I can see that there's a lens that could happen by the time we get to this time next year.
That's great. And my final question, Greg, that I ask every guest is along the line of asset protection is legacy. So what is your legacy, Greg? Yeah,
it's a great question. Thanks for giving me a prep on that one to know that I was coming. I really appreciate it. It's a great question. So when I think of legacy, I think of a couple things. Since we're talking business right now, I'll start at that place. From a business standpoint, I want Real Property Management Colorado to be a company that even long lives past me, that we will have people that do care enough to carry that on even beyond my days, whatever that may look like. I want us to be an organization that truly does care. We have such a cool responsibility day in and day out to make sure that we're putting roofs over people's heads, we're keeping them maintained, et cetera, and helping our investors while they're growing net worth, while they are contributing toward their, retirement, et cetera. So that's an integral piece. I'll segue into that just on the personal front. I'm very blessed. I've been married to my bride for 30 years. We've got 3 daughters, a son-in-law, granddaughter in the mix. And so I want to make sure that my legacy is that they can look at a husband, dad, Opa, as my little granddaughter calls me, that operates as someone who legitimately cares for people, that operates with integrity, that does a great job, and he puts forth his perfect effort every single day. Some days those efforts are better than others, but they all know that I'm doing my very best every single day, as is the organization that I have the privilege of overseeing.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Greg. This was super informative, and we will definitely share links in the show notes to all of your contact information. Have a great day.
Thanks, Pam. It's been great talking with you.
Hey there, if you enjoyed this podcast, or even if it just sparked your interest and curiosity, you are going to love my book, Legally Ever After. It's available on Amazon and as an Audible version on Audible. And while you're there, why not grab a copy for your neighbor, your best friend, your parents, your sister? Just think about it. And if you want a free chapter, head over to my website, lawmother.com/LEA.